What a lot of people make the mistake of when getting into this is they'll take a 100% of a running program, 100% lifting program, put the two together and wonder after 4 weeks why their calves feel like they're going to explode. It's because they're operating at 200% output, because each of those training plans were designed with 100% of the individual's application in mind. This may irritate the endurance camp, but I think one of the biggest benefits of strength training progressively over years and committing to it from a compound movement point of view is the biomechanical awareness that gives you that can then translate to other things is more valuable at source than the other way around. You go into each day with the same mindset. Whilst I've spoken about the different lessons to be learned from each end of the spectrum, there are lots of crossovers in how you need to grit your teeth and gear yourself up in terms of mentally for those sessions. I mean, let's say Monday is Slipknot and Saturday is an opera. It's kind of that sort of scale across the week whereby you approach each day with a slightly different mindset.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk Friel. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. My guest today is Fergus Crawley, who is the founder and head coach of Omnia Performance. Our chat is a bit out of the ordinary as Omnia Performance works with hybrid athletes. Most of their clients have goals that are both in the strength world as well as in endurance. Concurrent training is oftentimes used to describe opposing athletic goals. Having focused on rugby throughout his teenage years, Fergus fell into concurrent training given his love for variety and challenge, and quickly refocused his pursuit of triathlons, running performance, strength sports, and bodybuilding. Fergus has dedicated himself to studying and practicing concurrent training, which included a successful attempt to back squat 500 pounds and run a sub 5-minute mile in the same day. Fergus also works closely with military operatives to help them prepare for selection in various levels of military and law enforcement. No matter what kind of athlete you may be, I hope you enjoy this intriguing interview and learn a thing or two that may help you achieve your goals. All right, well, welcome to the CoachCast, Fergus Crawley, founder of Omnia Performance. Thanks for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me. Look forward to chatting things through.
Where are you in the world?
I'm in Edinburgh, and I've driven up from London this morning, which for you guys is just up the road, I think in your terminology. For us is about as far as you can really drive in the UK and not something people do very often. And I think I will just flag, for the sake of the editors as well, I'm sat in a podcast studio in Edinburgh that has never, ever had any external noise. And there is some work happening up above that is making the odd hammer sounding noise. So please consider me a professional in the background.
We'll have our fingers crossed for sure.
Yeah, that's what we hope for.
Well, what you drove up in a day took me like 8 days because I actually did the tour of Great Britain once, and it started in Edinburgh.
Fantastic.
And our prologue was at the Stirling Castle, and we had a race up into the castle, and then stage one started at the Edinburgh Castle. And we rolled out of town, and we finished in London about 8 days later. So that's the only time I've been to your part of the world, but it was a great experience. I actually didn't get to see a whole lot of it except the gutter, the crosswinds.
Yeah, and a lot of haze, I can imagine, in front of you. Just Edinburgh Castle and Stirling Castle are very, very similar as well. So I'm surprised. It's a good thing you got to the right castle for the start line, I guess, is the main thing there.
Well, I had some great memories, so it's an awesome spot. Tell me more about Omnia Performance yourself. How the heck do you get into building this hybrid coaching business, and what's your athletic background that led you to this point?
So, at a personal level, rugby was my sport growing up, and Scotland is a reasonable rugby nation. We could perform better in the last 10 minutes of every game, but that's a separate discussion entirely. I unfortunately had 3 concussions in 4 weeks towards the tail end of my time at school, which basically knocked on the head any aspirations of a rugby career, which they were the aspirations. And I played between 6 and 12, which is back row and centre for anyone that's aware. I know rugby's on the up in the US, so fingers crossed that means something to people. And just got into self-driven health and fitness from there, where I lost a bit of body fat. I learned to lift weights for sort of a hypertrophy point of view, but I kept up my cardiovascular training as if I was a rugby player. And then went full tilt into powerlifting for about 4 or 5 years before 2018 when I committed to my first sort of charity fundraising event where I attempted to squat 500,000 kilos in 24 hours to represent the 500,000 deaths by suicide in men around the world every year. Logically, high strength base. I could squat 260 at the time, which is 565 pounds, I believe, or maybe even 570.
Your thighs are the size of my chest. Yeah.
At that point, my thighs and my femur length is good for squatting, but not great for bike riding power to weight ratio. So there's pros and cons. But I think my thighs are probably, genetically, that's where I've been most blessed, I will say. But what I had to do there was just bring up my aerobic base as much as possible to be able to sustain that output. And that's where I first met Johnny, who was my coach for many, many years before we founded the business in 2021. And I kind of accidentally fell into this world of hybrid training by creating a challenge for myself that required a high strength base supplemented with a aerobic development. I took naturally to the aerobic development because of the rugby background. And whilst I was at university, I'd been doing S&C work with the rugby team there as a result of wanting to still be in that world. Was doing individual coaching for people there, more from a sort of bodybuilding and powerlifting strength bias point of view, but sort of built my coaching experience in that setting. Excuse me. And then, whistle stop tour, 2018, 2019, 2020, 3 big charity fundraising events for Movember, the world's largest men's health organization, which kind of built my, I guess, profile and ability as a quote-unquote hybrid athlete taking on these events, to the point where it made sense for us to try and tackle the problem at the time. This was a much less conventionally spoken about thing of how do people effectively balance strength and endurance training, because we work with a lot of people now. I was one of these people that you come from a sporting background where you've worked really hard to build something over the years and you want to hold on to that. We've got a lot of people that have built strength or moved weights over a certain amount of time, and it's just what they default to because it's something they can do in and around work. And we don't believe, the people we work with often don't believe, that in pursuit of something new and exciting, there's any reason to just completely abandon all of that athletic history in pursuit of the new thing if you enjoy it. That's the key. We're all about trying to help people enjoy the variety of fitness without necessarily taking themselves too seriously. We want them to take what they take seriously very seriously, but that means different things to different people. And for me personally, that's what I get from this is, how can I, for example, I'm going to Iceland on Thursday to give the Husafell stone a go, which is a 186 kilo carrying stone. That. Yeah. So it's that is going to teach me very, very different things. And
explain that again. What is it?
So it's the law goes that Snorri Bjornsson, who was a reverend in, I think it was the 1800s, maybe even earlier, his sheep kept getting stolen from a sheep pen. So he commissioned a farmhand, I think it was actually his daughter, to find the biggest rock that they could to find a way to block the sheep in the pen. The Husafell stone was carried and put in front of the sheep pen. His sheep were no longer stolen. Since then, with Iceland having such a rich history of strength, given it's such a harsh and barren landscape, only the strong survive, it has become world's strongest. It's probably the most famous lifting stone in the world, with the Dinnie stones being second. 186 kilos, which is 409 pounds, I believe. And the aim is, I can't remember the Icelandic pronunciations, I'm not even going to try, but lazy bones is if you can pick it up off the floor. Half styrke, which is half strong, is if you can pick it up and put it onto the sheep pen. And then full styrke, which is full strong, is if you can pick it up and carry it a lap around the sheep pen, which is what I'm hopefully going to be able to do on Thursday. And this ranking system in Iceland was part of how they assessed your ability if you were going to be going on to ships, Vikings, that sort of thing. So again, lots of parallels with the stone lifting heritage of Scotland in here, where it was, there's certain stones where if you lifted it, you would qualify as a chieftain, things like this. I'm really enjoying this at the moment, but this comes from 12 years of strength training with a barbell for me. But what I enjoy is learning things about myself that can make me a better individual through the very varied spectrum of fitness. And I think that the best example and the thing that really put me into this world from a profile point of view and really helped me understand that I could do this was a 500-pound back squat and sub 5 minute mile in the same day in July 2020.
Sub 5 minute after a 500-pound squat?
Yes. So it was within the same 2-hour window. I could have done it within a bigger window, but there were some volunteers and I'd borrowed a squat rack and things like that. So I had to get it down pretty sharpish. But that was originally spoken about in CrossFit Level 1 as, I believe the wording was along the lines of the ideal CrossFit athlete would be able to squat 500 pounds and run a sub 5-minute mile. Ironically, nobody had ever done that until me and Adam Klink in Virginia did it 2 weeks apart in July of 2020. So,
wow, the original CrossFit athlete right here.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go that far, mainly for legal reasons as well, but also because it's
you never heard it here.
What I like to differentiate hybrid, again, it's become a bit of a buzzword, which I do acknowledge.
Yeah,
and actually
let's get into it.
I think CrossFit is the testing of disciplines blended together into a new sporting discipline, whereas hybrid training we view as the concurrent training of different athletic disciplines that do not inherently support one another, and whose disparate components are not essential to success at any one sport. So in simple terms, powerlifting does not make you a better runner. Running does not make you a better powerlifter. Obviously, there's some aerobic benefits and there's some benefits of strength, but training for performance and actual outcomes in those sports do not support one another. So trying to train for progress concurrently, ergo, hybrid training. Multi-discipline sport like triathlon or trying to PB your marathon the same year as PB your Ironman is all within the same wheelhouse at one end of the athletic spectrum where it's aerobic endurance focused.
Yep.
Thereby, those are not conflicting disciplines, therefore not hybrid training. That would fall into multi-sport as you originally did, because obviously that was TrainingPeaks' origin. It was a multi-sport platform. So that definition I think is important. There's then things in the middle like Hyrox, Hybricon, there's the Deca games, all that sort of stuff, which I'd call, in my world, I'd view as a more accessible, lower skill version of CrossFit, where it's taken a blend of a fitness spectrum and created something that sits in the middle and is tested at once as that blend, rather than the individual components separately. But we are a little bit in the weeds with this conversation. So from my point of view, hybrid training is now a marketing word that can help more people try more things. And from our point of view, we could maybe sit here and try and protect, well, it's actually about individual components and performance and these things. We are just about more people trying new things and having more fun. I think the only time we'll pipe up and try and really hold people accountable to the original definition, which came from Alex Viada in 2015, it's worth mentioning in his book, The Hybrid Athlete, is when egos come into play and somebody thinks that their way of doing things is this is the only way that you can be a hybrid, because it's essentially it's a way of giving confidence to people that previously believed that for them to try a marathon or give a triathlon a go, they would have to abandon their body composition or their muscle mass or the Olympic lifting that they've spent years improving, because those things, I mean, you'll know with your own sport, it becomes a part of your identity. You're precious about it. So you don't want to let it go, but there might be that bit of curiosity in the back of your head saying, oh, I'd love to run a marathon one day. And I was one of those people that only let that be a curiosity whilst I was powerlifting, because I did not think a powerlifter could run a marathon. And that is effectively why we created the business. That is effectively what hybrid training was coined to tackle. It's now evolved into this somewhat murky marketing buzzwordy term, which people have their own opinions on. But I think what it does is it gives more people confidence to try more things, which can make them happier, healthier individuals. So, great.
Yeah. So what does a typical client look like that comes to you? Are they, I want to do this Hyrox thing, or they're like, I want to do these two opposing events?
We've got everyone, which, again, in marketing meetings is difficult from a... who is your customer avatar?
Yeah, right.
Question.
Right.
It was a question one of your team asked when we were over, actually, and we kind of just gave a garrulous, well, everyone, really, which isn't useful. But we have run-of-the-mill Hyrox athletes. We have people that come to us saying, it's my dad's birthday this year. I would like to, for his 50th, do a 500 kilogram powerlifting total and then run 50K with my dad to honor the 50-50. Because we have people that they like to be playful with their fitness and they trust us to do it. We have people that want to do specialist military courses. We have people that want to do their first Ironman that come from a lifting background. and they want to make sure that they hold on to some of their muscle. They might speak to triathlon coaches that don't necessarily understand that people enjoy lifting for the sake of lifting rather than just as a way of supporting the triathlon. So they put trust in us to be able to be the people that understand that, given that we are, I guess, just meatheads at heart, really. from years gone by, lifting was the thing that first got me into self-driven training, and I think it's the thing I always default to in recovery periods, just because it's, I guess, warm, indoors, easily accessible, that sort of stuff. Triathlon is often less warm, more outdoors, and quite kit prohibitive for at some times, which can be draining, but very rewarding. We get a lot of people that just want to push themselves, and a lot of those people come from team sports background or a background of commitment to one sport, where the thread of DNA that runs through everybody that we work with is curiosity, I'd say. It's, can I do this thing that scares me a little bit? Then there's the layer below that, which is how quickly or how effectively can I do this thing that scares me? But in amongst all that, the core is people that have been training with commitment for a while and would just like to push it a little bit further by leaning into that curiosity a little bit more, which is something I've experienced myself. So very much understand from a self-development point of view why that's an important thing to do.
Yeah. No, what I love is that unleash yourself, allow yourself to explore, and there's no one mold, but it's uncomfortable. Are you finding that strength athletes are better able psychologically to take on endurance? Or, because coming from an endurance background, it's tough to put myself in that CrossFit world, if you will, the barbell world. It's very hard mentally to go to the gym with non-endurance athletes. But yet you're trying to get people to break down those barriers and allow themselves to grow and not have those limitations. Are you finding one group, can adapt better than the other?
This may irritate the endurance camp, but I think one of the biggest benefits of strength training progressively over years and committing to it from a compound movement point of view is the biomechanical awareness that gives you that can then translate to other things is more valuable at source than the other way around, because you need to get used to being functionally tight. You need to get used to being functionally biomechanical, whereas endurance is more, you're functionally loose in many ways, whereby you're moving in a locomotive pattern, which is demanding, obviously, and challenging, obviously, but doesn't require the same concentrated application biomechanically that strength training does. And I think that means that if you take a strength athlete that's learning to run and you talk to them about their gait, they might have a little bit more of an understanding of how to manipulate their femurs or their cadence or that sort of thing than an endurance athlete might when you say, why didn't you sit back with your hips a little bit more so that we can try and open up the bottom position of a squat, because they're used to being a little bit more loose and lacking that tension that strength is ultimately controlled tension with power applied for the most part. So I think strength athletes in general can adapt a little bit better to the skill acquisition of endurance training, because again, endurance training, not to say it's not skillful, but the entry point skill, you can move effectively without having optimized it. Whereas swimming is a great example of this. You can get in and swim 50 meters and you can do it and you can have a time and it can look, that person is swimming. But if you put them next to Lucy Charles Barkley, you'll see very quickly that one person is moving much more efficiently than the other. Whereas if you take an average endurance athlete that hasn't necessarily done any heavy compound barbell work, there's a steeper and longer learning curve there, I believe. But that's not, again, it's not to say one camp is inherently better than the other or anything like that. I think it's just the biomechanical awareness from strength athletes translated to endurance is a little bit more. It's a path that's easier trodden in some ways, but what I think endurance athletes have a great understanding of, where strength athletes don't, is of tolerance of volume, of fatigue, recovery, of things around your training that can input your performance when it comes to the actual training session itself. I think because strength training is a lot more concentrated a lot more high intensity, a lot of the work that you do outside of it is very much body composition or sort of macronutrient focused. There's things you can be doing. But I think endurance athletes are a lot more aware of the totality of their training in context of fatigue. But again, it's all down to the individual, really.
Yeah.
I think in the world of hybrid training, if you are coming from a strength-dominant background, it is easier to hold on to that whilst transitioning into endurance than it is the other way around, because I do think strength takes longer to build than, I mean, we'll get genetic freaks, obviously. There's farmers that'll be able to pick up 200 kilos on day one in the same way that there'll be Kenyans that'll be able to run at X pace immediately just because that's how they've grown up. But and there's people in Scotland and Iceland that can just lift up stones, apparently. So I think it's in the way hybrid is presented online currently, and most people that come to us, having a developed strength base is a more effective entry point. But obviously, it completely depends on the individual. It doesn't mean an endurance base is an ineffective entry point. Just look at myself as well. I had a lot of strength to lose before I became quote unquote weak, and I think biomechanical understanding, even just tendon development, even just ability to put force through muscles and then repeatedly impact on those, awareness of the difference between a niggle and an injury, fatigue, muscle soreness, all these things. I think there's a lot of similarities, but again, broaden out this spectrum, and the things I've learned from endurance, the things I've learned from strength are unique to one another, and that's why I enjoy it, because I'm not going to get the chance to learn what it's like to endure a single stage 250k ultra unless I do it, and I'm not going to learn what it's like to pick up a very heavy rock with a lot of history and heritage around it unless I go and do it. And the training that's required for those things is, I'm very much process over outcome driven, as a lot of our athletes are. It's very much, who do I become in committing to this goal, rather than who am I going to be when I cross the finish line. And I think that's where, both sides of the camp have the melting pot of lessons and experience is what I love most about the athletes that we work with, because it's so varied. People have their own reasons for doing things. They have their own training backgrounds. And I think I personally think strength athletes have a lot to learn from endurance athletes, and endurance athletes have an awful lot to learn from strength athletes. And I think the camps that we find ourselves in
absolutely
doesn't really help that.
Yeah, even within the endurance world, we have a lot that we can learn from other endurance sports. A triathlete looks at training differently than a swimmer, a pure swimmer, differently than a pure runner, differently than a pure cyclist. If we can open up just those barriers within endurance, that would help. Let alone now learn from the strength world. And when I think of strength training, a lot of it too is mobility. And I think in endurance, certainly as a cyclist, mobility just gets worse and worse and worse year after year. If all I'm doing is cycling, I just get weaker, and less mobility. If I can learn to open up pattern movement from, I can only do that by experiencing a different sport, right? I can't get that from cycling, but yet that will help my cycling get better. And in fact, I was just in Spain for a week and met with, 10 different pro cycling teams, and every single team now is strength training year around. Like, cyclists need to hear that. Tour de France riders are training in the gym year around. And that actually, I didn't see that 6-8 years ago. Like, that's been a big shift. So they're starting to talk to, they're reaching across the aisle and talking to the strength crowd and saying, hey, you've got something there. We can get better because of what you're doing. What can we learn from you? And so this is starting to blend. We need to open up our eyes and have, more, access to other ways of thinking. And that's what I love about, what you're bringing to the marketplace. I think it's also excellent for older athletes. The older we get, certainly strength becomes an issue, and coming from an endurance background, that's something on my mind of, being over 50, like maintaining strength. So, what's that? I assume you're attracting some older type of athletes that are really seeing how they need to maintain strength as well. Yeah,
100%. And I think a lot of those older athletes are very much looking at their overall training outputs holistically, in the sense that, how do I make myself resilient, robust for years to come. And ultimately,
Right.
I think it's how do I keep enjoying my training for as many years as possible? Because, oh dear, how am I going to feel if I can't train? This is quite an important part of my life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I'm conscious of. And ultimately why one of the biggest things I've loved about training this way is when I've got an injury or a niggle, I can pivot quite quickly into something else and apply. I can feel like I'm winning day to day. Whereas if you are a sole swimmer or a sole runner, like the examples you gave, if you can't run or you can't swim, your whole world falls apart, which is the challenge. So I think with the older athletes that we work with, generally speaking, they come from a background of having moved before in a sport, but there are more endurance athletes that come to us wanting to pick up a bit of strength work than there are the other way around. And I think the attentiveness to the technicality side of things is always really refreshing with them, because they've put their performance aspirations in triathlon, cycling, swimming, whatever it may be, to the side a little bit. And they're now just open-minded to how do I move as efficiently as possible? Because swimming, biking, running, efficiency is at the core of all that, and you understand it within that context. But lifting is all about efficiency as well. It's how do we move a barbell from A to B? There are moment arms at play from a physics point of view. Again, my short femurs joke earlier. I have short femurs, which means that my point from A to B is not quite as long as somebody with incredibly powerful high FTP legs on a bike might have. So there's trade-offs everywhere. And I think that's where open-mindedness is the thing that the older athletes come to us with. And that's what's most important in this, I believe, because like you said, strength training is something that has been vilified for years by some endurance camps, because why would I do strength training when I'm trying to be an athlete? When I'm a cyclist, I should only be cycling. But again, research indicates that weighted load through a full range of motion is as effective from a stretch mechanism as static stretching can be. Things like that. There are ways that we can strengthen ourselves beyond the single discipline. Cross training is not a new thing. It's just another form of cross training, just because it's a bit further along the other end of the spectrum. I think open-mindedness is a great thing in fitness training, sport, and firmly believe that unless you are trying to be a professional athlete or the best in the world or podiuming at whatever your discipline you choose, then trying to extract and learn from each camp is the best thing that we can possibly do, because they've all got unique insights, they've all got unique experiences, and the more that we can experience and enjoy those insights ourselves, the more we'll get from it at going right back to what I said at the start, a holistic level. So I think working in strength training from a general health point of view, 100%. Working in strength training as a supportive athletic mechanism, 100%. And when I say strength training, I do mean loaded resistance training, not bilateral banded hops with next to no resistance for 3 sets of 12 and then you move on to the turbo, which has become a little bit of there's been a bit of a blurry line there over the years, I think. Strength training should not mimic your endurance training. So great myth, for example, cyclists or runners should be doing 3 sets of 20 on back squats because that's most like running. Completely different mechanism at play, and actually they're getting a lot of high volume in their legs through the running. Therefore, what are they not getting? High intensity, concentrated load through their legs in a non-running setting. Best place to do that? With a barbell in the gym. So it's working that range, and whilst if 90% of a training block is focused on sport specificity and 10% is allocated to cross training, make that 10% as specific to the demands that you require as an individual as possible to support that 90%. But just because you're doing this 10% doesn't mean that you're deviating from the other 90. And I think that's the mindset that people often find themselves in the trap of. But it comes from competitiveness. It comes from caring about your discipline and your sport. And again, I'm very much enjoyment biased. I have no aspirations to be the best in the world at anything. I can't really. There's no hybrid athlete league worldwide or anything that will test your back squat and your mile on the same day. We've looked into it. Events are hard to make work, so we'll put that on hold for a while. But I think circling right back to your question on the sort of the older athletes from a strength training point of view, general health, 100% supportive of your goals that are probably going to become more challenging as time goes on, as you get older and you need to deal with different things. There can only be downstream benefits. Mark Bell, based out of Sacramento, has a phrase that I absolutely love. He some of his views and opinions have got a little bit more controversial in recent years, but that might just be for YouTube engagement. But he has always said, strength is never a weakness. And I've always liked that, because I think it's a really good way of viewing things, that there is no negative consequence to trying to get a bit stronger. And I think what a lot of endurance athletes consider getting a bit stronger is they think that they might accidentally turn into Jay Cutler overnight, rather than, if I can move a barbell competently and acquire that skill. One, I've acquired new skill, great. Two, better biomechanical understanding. And three, there'll be adaptive benefits that come from this that don't just actually make me stronger, but can then be translated with sport-specific training to my primary sport. So to completely plagiarize, strength is never a weakness.
Yeah, nice, love it. So if we get into some more of your coaching methodology, if my goal is a certain, back squat and a sub, for me, it's going to be 6-minute mile, right? How might you periodize that? You're not going to improve both at the same rate, which is improving faster than the other. And how are you going to work those two within, practically speaking, a training week? What are some of your kind of rules of thumb that you like thinking about as you start working with an athlete?
So the foundation for everything is individuality, and what an individual starting point is. Because as you've said, the rate at which those things will adapt, if you get somebody that's never squatted before versus spent their whole life squatting, the rate of adaptation will be very different. But the core principles of how we approach any goal or any demand that somebody comes to us with, or any of the training plans in the marketplace that's sort of off the shelf, they all follow a similar structure, which is intensity peaks at the start of the week, volume peaks at the end of the week, and they invert as the week goes on. So heaviest squatting, hardest effort running comes earlier in the week. Longer, slower stuff comes at the end of the week. Higher reps, assistance work comes at the end. Middle is tempo, strength endurance, sets of 8, sets of 10, that sort of stuff. And we do that because within the context of a training week or a microcycle, in this context, a 7-day period, consolidating stresses is an effective way of trying to manage the recovery from a high intensity dosage of work in an area. So the energy systems aren't the same, but as uncomfortable as it is, heavy squats and track intervals in the same day is what we found to be the most effective way of getting the most bang for your buck in adaptation over a period of time. Because if you were daily undulating periodization, for example, easy day, hard day, you would not be able to recover from a hard day on the lower body to develop top end strength at the rate at which you wanted to then go into a fully recovered hard effort lower body to then recover again, track session to then recover again to go into hard effort lower body. So by consolidating stresses and grouping intensities into similar sort of packages like lower body, hard effort, track efforts, track intervals, hard effort, or heavy upper body and hard effort swimming, 10 by 100, something like that, we are essentially spiking that area in terms of biomechanically once within the context of the week. And then all of the aerobic work that comes later in the week can kind of act indirectly as a recovery mechanism whilst also being a way of adapting to the aerobic pathways at play. So we found that to be the most effective way to understand an athlete's relationship with how they respond to intensity and volume, because I tried this with my 500-pound squat sub 5. We've tried it with other athletes. If you put intensity and volume at different levels across the week like you would in other programming, it becomes very difficult to isolate what is the thing that is causing the fatigue that is preventing the person from hitting the numbers, or is causing the person to feel like they've hit a brick wall and we need to deload. And you don't know whether it's the top end sets of 3 at 90% squats, or you don't know whether it's the 4x800s at the track with 10x50s at the end. So by looking at that intensity and volume curve, we can keep an eye on how, within those consolidated stresses, somebody is responding to things. And I will say the 500-pound squat and sub 5-minute mile, has tested this theory more than anything ever has, because I've found the pattern to be good squat session, bad track session, bad squat session, good track session. And it was a very interesting wave to ride, so to speak, but that really helped reinforce that. I think other than that, from a methodological point of view, all we try and really do is find the minimum effective dose for the maximum adaptation. So I say this flippantly, but we want athletes to be as lazy as possible to adapt at the rate that they can physiologically over time. So more training is not always better, which is a blanket rule. I think you'll probably agree from a cycling background as well. And especially when you're balancing disciplines concurrently, because what a lot of people make the mistake of when getting into this is they'll take a 100% of a running program, 100% lifting program, put the two together and wonder after 4 weeks why their calves feel like they're going to explode. It's because they're operating at 200% output, because each of those training plans were designed with 100% of the individual's application in mind. So it's removing the fluff, it's sensibly dialing up, dialing down certain components of the microcycle, and then sort of the sort of wider context beyond that, obviously. But the sort of core of all of our programming is intensity peaks at the start of the week and volume peaks at the end, and those invert as the week goes on, so we can keep an eye on how that works. And whether it's from a one-to-one coaching point of view, obviously we can be much more hands-on with that. But what we do find people experience from a training plan point of view as well is the first couple of weeks are quite tough, because you're doing things in the same day that you would normally try and spread out as much as possible. But the work capacity and confidence and ability to perform under fatigue that gives you after only 2 or 3 weeks is really quite rewarding, because once you're tapered off, fatigue masks fitness. The amount of people that start to worry that they've lost all of their strength because their endurance fatigue is masking it, when we taper off, people go, wow, I feel amazing. I've performed really well. But it's hard to have faith in that process until you've sort of gone through it. But yeah, we do find that's the best way to real top-line methodological point of view. That is the core of how we put things together with whatever the goal may be, even if it's just single discipline focused.
Yeah, when you mention more training isn't always better, the first thing I thought of is, I'm going to plagiarize my father, Joe Friel, but he always taught me, do the least amount of the most specific training at the right time. And that's kind of a hard concept, especially for endurance athletes, where it's just more and more hours, more and more miles, but the least amount and the most specific at the right time. And so the right time, and bringing out that freshness, that masking, the fatigue is masking the fitness. That's a hard concept to get, but once you get that, it's pretty magical. And then back into my world of endurance cycling, you mentioned combining intensity days, intensity sessions in the same day earlier in the week. Again, pro cycling experience, from what I've seen recently, I've seen pro cycling teams do their sprint workout, shorter session in the morning, it might be 2.5 hours, and then a strength workout, in the afternoon. Again, those intensities being very, very high in the same day. And then the volume goes up through the week. So again, I don't know.
Cool to hear. Very cool to hear.
I don't know who's talking to who, but there's some magic happening in there.
I think it's a great thing to experience as well, because it does. You can feel. You go into each day with the same mindset. And whilst I've spoken about the different lessons to be learned from each end of the spectrum, a high intensity bout of. There are lots of crossovers in how you need to grit your teeth and gear yourself up in terms of mentally for those sessions. I mean, let's say Monday is Slipknot and Saturday is an opera. It's kind of that sort of scale across the week, whereby you approach each day with a slightly different mindset, which, if we go back to the self-development point of view, and something we're really keen on talking about, is how do you approach these things from a mentality point of view? Do you approach them aggressively? Do you approach them with a sense of zen? Because we'll know Zone 5 versus Zone 2 are very, very different states of mind. And by consolidating those stressors, you never have to switch from fight or flight in the context of the same training day. You can kind of wake up and know, right, today's a tough day. I'm excited for this because I'm nervous I'm going to hit the numbers. This is the day where intensity is the main focus. And then Saturday morning you wake up and it's right, okay, just need to do the time, make sure I've got all my kit, go out and just enjoy being outdoors. And I personally, again, this might just be my own bias speaking, but I find that a really, really healthy way at a personal level to approach things, because I feel like I've worked the range from, all out aggression to peace of mind and zen.
Yeah. What about periodization? If you're an endurance background athlete is coming to you, will you say, okay, we can just do some maintenance on the endurance side, but let's really kind of focus hard for the next month or whatever it might be on the strength side? So they're not always equal training bouts, but you're focusing one over another.
So essentially it'll be prioritization, then periodization. Effectively, we can sort of the hierarchy is isolating what is the intention and the timeline on which we're working here. What is the time availability? What makes sense? What's actually achievable realistically? All the obvious questions. And then what we'll try and do from a endurance point of view, anything maintenance, we can default to kind of just skill maintenance as a baseline. Beyond that can be a sort of an actual output maintenance. So if there's a certain threshold pace or a certain aerobic volume that we want to maintain, it will depend on the athlete's goals downstream. But if they are between marathons but want to do a 6-week strength block because they're doing one in the spring and then one in the autumn, for example, then we'll maintain a higher volume to ramp into the next one than if it was somebody that just wants to do recreational 5Ks, for example. But with all strength work, we'll try and build within sort of 4 to 6 week blocks and work athletes within the range of 75 to 95% of their 1RM. Sometimes we'll then give them permission to sort of hit an RPE 9 or maybe even 10 if they go off plan a little bit. I've seen some videos that are very much 10s rather than 9s as part of that, because that's a key metric that we want to develop. So generally for compound lifting, we'll use percentages periodized, and then all assistance work will be based on RPE, because the impact on work capacity, on sustained output from a fatigue point of view from the endurance training means that one day you might be able to hit 4 sets of 8 really comfortably at X weight, and then actually your engine will just drop off the following. So top end compounds generally done on percentages, assistance work generally done on RPEs. And then from a maintenance or a periodization from an endurance point of view, again, we'll look at volume metrics. We don't place quite as much emphasis on them as you would were you looking at a letsrun.com forum for the ideal marathon volume, because we might be dealing with athletes with a higher body weight. We might be dealing with athletes with a little bit younger running age. We might be dealing with athletes who can only devote 3 sessions a week to their running. So because they've got lifting sessions that they want to factor in as well. From a swimming point of view, again, I'm sure you'll agree, it's kind of a case of if you can swim at a certain pace, you just kind of need to be in the pool once or twice a week to maintain that for a while, and then it's kind of enter the next phase and then try and build up that pace again. But yeah, we'll it all depends on the individual athlete's goals if we're in a sort of maintenance phase on either or. But what we always encourage people to do is always try and maintain some level of skill in the movement with anything that you would like to return to. So if you know that you're on a hiatus from triathlon because you're doing a marathon, 1 swim a week, 1 easy 45-minute turbo, or 1 aerobic over-under turbo session a week, just because when you get back to it afterwards, it won't have taken anything away from your prep, maybe a little bit more time and inconvenience commitment, but if you return to triathlon, you're somebody who can probably prioritize your time. So I think there's a fine way we can make it work. But I think that's where the reason that we get athletes come to us is for that exact reason, which is they've committed to a marathon or a triathlon and they've abandoned their strength training. They've done it and they think, well, I've ticked that box. I'm going to go back to the gym. Oh, I'm really weak and don't enjoy this anymore. What do I do now? So I think, we'll always look at things progressively from there'll be an element of periodization in all of our programming, but there is an auto-regulation built in with the RPE. From a weight training point of view, we'll generally use heart rate, LTHR, Joe Friel, as sort of calculations for people's approach to that, so that heart rate's a primary metric for the most part. Anything marathon, 10K, 5K specific, we'll use pacing towards the end. But again, heart rate and RPE relative to each end of the spectrum are the best auto-regulated methods for an individual to give their best in that session so that they can keep moving things forward, even if sometimes week 1 you're hitting, let's say, X numbers, and week 4 you're hitting X numbers again at the same execution level. You've got 4 weeks more of fatigue in you. If you're hitting them at the same level of execution, you've improved. You might not feel like it at the time, but when all that fatigue dissipates and that mask of fitness is removed, you will be stronger, you will be faster. It's just difficult to feel that in the moment. I think that's where people struggle the most, is they expect a really linear upward curve that you can periodize 16 weeks in advance, but we from a one-to-one point of view, we actually program on a week-by-week basis, generally speaking,
Right.
because people will adapt. How do people respond come Thursday to the heavy squats on Monday? Some people will lap it up. Some people will be completely on the floor. How do people respond to a 3-hour bike ride on a Saturday versus somebody else? Some people will, again, no issue, can do volume all day, or they might be asleep until Sunday at 7 p.m. and wonder what the hell happened. So from a training plan point of view, we map things out, but do encourage people to auto-regulate and adjust and exercise some discretion on their priorities and where their strengths and weaknesses are, because a real part of what we're going to teach people is their ability to understand fatigue, their ability to understand perceived exertion, their ability to understand when they're really, really pushing and where they're adapting versus when they may be in a bit of a hole, and to be able to make decisions on the fly or on a day-to-day basis with that. And I think one of the biggest challenges with hybrid training is it's not as linearly progressive as you would like a Wendler's 5-3-1.
Right.
You put your numbers
Right.
in, you've got the next 20 weeks of training, you go in, you hit them. If you miss them, you've probably had too many beers the night before or had a really bad night's sleep or something, because they're designed for you to be able to hit all of them. So auto-regulation, periodization sets the framework, auto-regulation dictates the outcome, I think is kind of the real summary there.
That's awesome. So you're not too worried about AI right now?
No, we're not. We're not, thankfully, because I know there's lots of people that are. But I think, I think I'm sure it can develop into that. But again, ultimately, a lot of our athletes that we work with are individual, self-driven, that look for a sense of belonging in community, with people that are like them. And given that they're doing individual sports, maybe as a bit of an outlier, going to a triathlon club on a Tuesday morning when you're not really a triathlete because you're wearing a hoodie with a barbell on it. What's that all about? And then they go to the gym and then like, hang on, what's that Ironman bag doing? I'm not sure about you. What we want to create is a safe space for these people to feel like they're not the weirdos.
I mean, I have to worry about what height socks to wear to the gym. Which is the protocol here, you know? In cycling, it's a thing, you know?
Yeah, it is. We've all got our things. And I think the hypothetical person I've not yet come up against, I don't know, maybe it's me, is the person that can effectively chameleon in all of these spaces and knows all the answers to, right, if I'm going to this powerlifting gym, I must wear this style of apparel.
Right.
If I'm going on this cycling group ride, I should wear this length of sock. But it's, I think it's, people love boxes. People love putting themselves in boxes and then shouting to other boxes that their box is the best. But I think most of the people that work with us are curious about what there is to learn from all of these individual boxes, and they embrace the undulations as we go. And they understand after time that some weeks will be completely predictable, some weeks will be completely unpredictable, because training is one stressor of many that they have to juggle. If you've just had a kid, if you've had too many beers the night before, if your car was written off the week before, if you've had an argument with your partner or your boss, whatever it might be, these are all things that are going to input your training outcomes. We can't view ourselves robotically. We can hypothetically, but the skill and the actual coaching element is being able to move things on the fly as and when those stresses spike or drop. And that's, I think, what we enjoy most about this, is helping people understand that and sort of working through it ourselves.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely the theory behind it is why you're planning, but then the individualization is what comes into play, and you have to edit the theory as you go along. And so it's the ultimate lesson in individualization. Yeah, I love it. Talk, quickly about recovery. As you said, you plan week by week on the individual level. Love it. Why? What things do you track that help you make decisions? What are you asking for from the athlete in terms of feedback loop that help you perform your job better?
So sync up all your devices. First of all, I'm sure you're as aware as anyone that you have a great ecosystem to be able to do that. So sync up those devices. We will generally look at heart rate trends. We will look at feedback trends in terms of RPE relative to weight. If people have HRV metrics in there, we'll keep an eye on those as well, but not nearly as much as personal feedback based on how they feel. We'll ask them to keep us posted if there's any sort of big changes to the schedule, if they've got, I don't know, a Christmas party they got out of hand, or their parents are coming to stay at the weekend, or whatever it might be, or it was especially humid. And then we can just make informed decisions as to, right, is this going to contribute to additional demand on this session, which hypothetically is this amount of demand? Probably. Where should we scale back logically based on the fact that person X normally is a bit in the gutter after some heavy strength training? if they have a 4-hour break on Saturday in brutal humidity, they get the hydration wrong, let's scale back on Monday, hit one top working set, and then everything else is just speed work because they'll be cooked the rest of the week if they hit it like that. We are huge proponents of do not ask us questions about the top of the pyramid, the grains of the sand at the top of the pyramid until you've nailed the basics. Sleep as effectively as you possibly can, nail your nutrition, nail your hydration, think about electrolyte balance and the climate you're in and all that stuff, and only then do we start looking at all of the sort of additional stuff. And to be honest, I mean, holding myself accountable, I probably don't nail all those. I think I had 5.5 hours of sleep last night. So it's I am not one to say, well, make sure that you're getting your morning ice bath followed by this and that.
Yeah, you're talking about the hierarchy of needs, if you will, of the pyramid of I guess progression, and don't worry about heat training if you're not getting your sleep. Exactly,
and it's those are the low-hanging fruit things to focus on because you think it's a pay to play in some ways. A lot of these things are pay to they're framed as pay to play, but the non-glamorous stuff, as with all training, and again, this is what I think training this way will teach you over time, is that it just reinforces that you do the work, you get the results, and actually you learn a lot about yourself along the way. So if things can be pieced together so that you can experience that, you'll probably then start to understand, okay, right, things have gone south this week, let's work backwards. I had a late night on Saturday, and then I had a really bad meal on Sunday, and then there's just been this little downstream effect from there. Okay, let's try again this weekend. I feel much better. Okay, I've manipulated some variables, off we go. Sleep's the main one. I mean, it's until I've nailed my sleep, I'm not really going to be thinking about any sort of focused recovery things beyond the basics for the most part, mainly because my schedule's too all over the place for me to really have those locked in solid routines that we'll sort of see caricatured on the internet. But I think given that most of our athletes are recreational, what we try and help them understand is what they can control to make themselves as effective as possible. And if they then want to explore other options, off-the-shelf options, things like that, happy to advise. But I think it's only in the world of professional athletics or professional sport where the studies on this can increase X by Y really apply to the point where they're worth, unless somebody's not particularly cost sensitive, spending beyond just nailing the basics. And I think that's what we really like to highlight, is the most effective way to recover is to not do too much training in the first place. And that's where we come back to the minimum effective dose. Be as lazy as you can for, I can't remember the exact phrase that your dad said, but you can probably throw it right back at me to circle right back on all this now. It's minimum effective dose.
Least amount of most specific at the right time.
There we go. Exactly that. least amount of most specific at the right time.
You know, Fergus, hey, this is awesome. Love the conversation. There's so much more to be dug into and unearthed, and, you know, we can go on forever. But yeah, I'm sure people would love to find out more about your teachings and how to get your programming. How can people find you, follow you? What do you use for social, etc.?
So I'm at Fergus Crawley. Omnia Performance is at Omnia Performance. We are www.omnia-performance.com, and all of our training plans are housed on TrainingPeaks Marketplace. And if anyone wants to look into any one-to-one coaching options, those are on the website that I just listed there. Beyond that, that's pretty much that. We find ourselves very, very funny on our own emailing list. So if you would like to confirm or deny whether you feel the same way, then head to the website and we'll direct you in that direction. But yeah, my main platform is on YouTube, which is just search Fergus Crawley, and that's where I'll put most informative discussions on this topic and sort of weave in a lot of the things we've discussed into my own training and how that's documented. So if you want to see, I guess, what existing in this training style looks like the most, then that's the best place to go.
Love it. And I take it you don't care what height of socks I wear.
I do not. There are. I think maybe just wear socks. I've never understand how people can be comfortable doing full distance tries with no socks on, but they're going much faster than me. So again, different problems for different demands, I think is the challenge there.
Love it. Thanks, Fergus. Thanks so much for your time.
I actually just ripped out my headphones there. I apologize, Dirk. What was that you were just saying?
Thanks for your time. It's been enjoyable.
I can't believe I pulled my headphones out at that critical moment. Thank you. Thank you again for having me. Great conversation. And don't hesitate to reach out to anyone if you've got any questions. We'll speak very soon.
Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.